Welcome to the Shintaido of America podcast. Shintaido is an amazing form of health exercise and body movement practice, inspired by martial arts, a non-combative training system for body and mind, invented by Japanese martial artists in the 1960s. Shintaido can be a way to open up to a deeper connection with ourselves, with our community, and with nature. In Season 1 of the podcast, I'll be reading from the book Shintaido, The Body is a Message of the Universe, by the founder of Shintaido, Hiroyuki Aoki. But before I jump into that, I have a favor to ask. Shintaido of America produces this podcast and other educational materials on a shoestring budget. There are many things you can do to help, and the most important one is that if you like this podcast, tell people about us. Share it on your social media, and give us a good rating on whatever platform you're using to listen to this. You can find links to this podcast, sign up for our free email newsletter, and find many other resources at our website, www.shintaido.org. That's www.shintaido.org. Hi, welcome to Episode 4 of the Shintaido of America podcast. I'm Shintaido instructor David Franklin. Imagine that you are watching a group of dancers or martial artists moving in synchronization, the group naturally breathing as one, timing synchronized to the microsecond, but not with military rigidity. They're moving with the naturalness and grace of a school of fish or a flock of birds. The scene shifts to a classical orchestra, each section and each musician contributing a part, which the conductor weaves together into a spectacular whole. Part of Aoki's inspiration in Shintaido was gained through the perspiration as Master Egami's disciple, leading karate training in his school. In Shintaido, the aim of the leader has shifted away from preparing the participants for combat and has moved much closer to that of the choreographer or conductor, letting the individual talent of each person shine while contributing positively to the life of the whole. So the choreographer, the orchestral conductor, and the karate master all share something in common, the ability to orchestrate group activity or to give Gorei, which in Japanese means the vocalized rhythm that supports the activity of the whole group. As I mentioned, our podcast today is like an audio book. I'll be reading from the book Shintaido, The Body is a Message of the Universe by the founder of Shintaido, Hiroyuki Aoki. Okay, ready? Here we go. Chapter 2, Section 2, Gorei as Conducting and Classical Studies through Kata. Gorei means conducting or leading group practice. A kata is a series of formal attack and defense movements. During my karate days, I studied many things, but I was chiefly occupied with two especially rewarding activities. One was the Gorei, which I repeated every day. The other was an extensive project requested by Mr. Egami to gather, arrange, and record all karate kata which had been handed down from generation to generation. Gorei is almost the same as conducting in the symphonic style. When I give the Gorei, I count in Japanese, ichi, ni, san, sometimes aloud and sometimes silently. To give Gorei means to help each individual in a group practice to express their own emotions, thoughts, or philosophy, and to bring all members together into a larger construction. In the karate classes at that time, any member who was practicing under my Gorei had permission to attack me at any moment. In the usual class, there were 50 to 60 people, and more than half had their black belts, so I had to be ready at all times to receive their attacks. There were also beginners in front of me waiting to be corrected, and finally there was the whole group moving to my Gorei. I had to pay full attention to these 3 points. Once I started to lead the whole class using a Gorei, I was never allowed to break my concentration, even for a second. Although it is almost impossible to imagine this kind of practice today, I repeated it every day. It is embarrassing now to think of my mistakes, but when I made a mistake and was hurt by a student's attack as a result, it was very useful for me, much more so than verbal instruction. The following story is quite recent, concerning a Shintaido gashuku, or retreat, that we held at Kujukuri Beach in Chiba Prefecture with 60 to 70 participants. During the final lesson, at sunset, people were moving about, but there was no break in concentration, just a continual flow of movement. I imagined that this was similar to the movement of African dancers from a primitive age. People were spinning around like whirlpools, mixing and holding hands with no one leading, playing off of each other's rhythm. There were radiant faces, no leaders or followers, no beginners or seniors, just a sunset and a long white beach. It seemed like some beautiful imaginary scenery in which flaming bats and tropical fish were dancing. Another time, while I was leading a class, a golden light suddenly came down from heaven and filled the dojo, immersing each member, including myself, in a radiant glow. Following the class, the face of each member was shining in awe. This was an unforgettable moment for me. On another occasion, I could hardly believe my eyes as I watched the 7 colors of the rainbow radiating from each person's body. Whenever I gave Gorei, I felt the presence of Wilhelm Furtwängler and Bruno Walter, German orchestral conductors. For me, Gorei was conducting, educating, expressing, and fighting. But more than this, it was praying to God. Of course, this has continued to the present day. A Japanese jazz critic, Teruhito Soejima, once introduced me in these words: "In jazz, there are no masterpieces. There is only good expression." I would like to recommend this description to all those who are giving Gorei today and will do so in the future. The other task, the study and compilation of classical kata, was an extremely difficult project because some had different forms in different geographical areas and because of the oral tradition. It was not easy to choose the right one. Most of the old practitioners of karate practiced very hard, perhaps a few forms, for many years. Though there were some books on the martial arts which described certain kata, there was no instructor, no matter how knowledgeable, who knew all of the traditional kata. Any one kata consisted of 20 to 80 attack and defense techniques, and the meanings or intent of some of these were quite obscure. On the other hand, it was awesome to find an incredible movement like musoken that can be spontaneously and instinctively expressed when our life is most threatened. Musoken is a form of sword movement, attack or defense, accomplished unconsciously using only the 6th sense. This discovery sent shivers up and down my spine when I recognized the high spiritual level attained by the old practitioners. Because karate came from Okinawa, where conquering rulers often changed, disarming the people each time they did, it is the product of an underground movement that gave rise to an oral tradition. When faced with an oral folk tradition, there are often several different versions, so some critics do not appreciate the fact that karate is also a classical form, similar to traditional Japanese martial arts. There were approximately 50 traditional karate kata. They originated in many different areas and in different circumstances, and some have several hundred years' history. Solely for the purpose of self-defense, traditional kata, having their background as actual fighting techniques, are much more effective than the more contemporary ones. The latter contain forms of gymnastic movement through which beginners can develop their athletic abilities, but traditional kata show us how to survive a critical situation and at the same time teach us breathing techniques which enable us to acquire the highest level of concentration. There are many kinds of movements in Karate-Do, and the ideas and imagination expressed in these movements are very rich and free. The popular karate we know from films and television is just one small part of this tradition. Not only in karate, but also in traditional Japanese martial arts, there are, in addition to fighting techniques, special hidden methods of concentration, willpower, and heijoshin, the ability to retain ordinary or everyday mind in the face of danger. When practitioners found and experienced these methods, they would enter a state of spiritual sublimity and sometimes discover a world of cosmic philosophy. If a practitioner studied only the fighting techniques from the Japanese martial arts, his training would amount to fighting with one hand tied behind his back. This type of limited study invariably leads to a complete misunderstanding of the true value of Japanese martial arts. 40 karate kata and 4 bojutsu kata are collected in Mr. Egami's book, Karate-do Kata for Professionals. Bojutsu is the art of the long staff. He was the special teacher for the Japanese armed forces until the end of World War II and was recognized as the top martial artist of Japan. It was a great honor for me to demonstrate these kata for his book. It is a valuable reference source for the martial arts, and if you are interested in classic karate-do, please add this book to your library. The difficult task of collecting these karate kata continued, as well as my study of other body movements. Eventually, all this blossomed into Tenshingoso, a form surpassing all traditional forms, which became the first basic technique of Shintaido. At the same time that I was conducting this study, I had formed my own group called Rakutenkai, all of whose members were deeply involved in the intense training and research that led to the creation of Shintaido. Every day and night we lived, ate, slept, and practiced together. 3 kinds of aspirations converged in my thinking. The first was the aspiration toward traditional introspective training, by which I could re-experience what our predecessors had experienced. The second was its opposite, an aspiration toward the artistic way, in which I would destroy or negate tradition and break the shell around me. The third was toward faith in the Creator, which has a very different order of value. These 3 aspirations were sometimes in conflict with each other, but somehow became harmonious in my world. They later appeared, respectively, in the 3 forms of Tenshingoso, Hikari to Tawomureru, and Eiko, the 3 great poles of Shintaido. During that time, I studied many other martial arts, and I analyzed the techniques of various masters. I also continued my study of art. At first on canvas, using oils, I explored the abstract, then abstract and 3-dimensional, and later non-formal art. Action as expression became my final goal, but I could find no reason to show the fruits of my research to the public. You've been listening to Episode 4 of the Shintaido of America podcast, a reading from the book Shintaido, The Body is a Message of the Universe by Hiroyuki Aoki. If you enjoyed today's podcast, the most important thing you can do to help is to tell people about us. Share the podcast on your social media and give us a good rating on whatever platform you're using to listen to this. Shintaido of America is a member-supported nonprofit organization, and there are many ways to support our truly micro-budget production of educational materials. And I really mean that. We produce a huge amount of content on volunteer power, but some things just require a few bucks in the bank. So make a donation or become a member of Shintaido of America. You can do that or sign up for our free email newsletter and also find all kinds of educational resources at our website, www.shintaido.org. That's whiskey.Sierra Hotel India November Tango Alpha India Delta Oscar Oscar Romeo Golf. You can also find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on YouTube by searching for Shintaido of America. Our episode today was recorded and edited by me, David Franklin, with support from Sarah Baker, Connie Borden, Teresa Soldatova, Jim Sterling, the Joe Zawilski Memorial Fund, and of course, the members of Shintaido of America. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Shintaido of America podcast. I'm Shintaido instructor David Franklin. Contents of this podcast copyright Shintaido of America 2022. Shintaido, opening to life.